Good morning, Winterview, back again with another brief dialogue for his dear friend, Annastacey. Just a follow-on from the last brief dialogue to keep the audience enthralled with the vicissitudes of X's life. You might recall that a pebble hit the windscreen when I was driving yesterday. Well, dear listener, that has become a crack in the windscreen overnight. A giant crack, which means, yet again, I've got to call the auto glass guy to come and fix it again for the third time in a year. Don't live in the rural areas where trucks drive is a lesson, perhaps, that I'm not learning, apparently. So, today's brief dialogue. What is it on? It's on the space of something. I don't know. There's no word for it. The space that is. The space that I am, so to speak. In this dialogue, it's pretty hard to explain space. It's kind of conceptual in a way. We just imagine that the gap between objects is something called space. That's an idea. First of all, I'd like to ask you to imagine relaxing. You don't have to relax, you can just imagine relaxing. You're sitting quietly. Let's put you somewhere nice to relax. Sitting quietly on a comfy reclining type of chair, maybe near a field or in a field if you like, overlooking a stream that's pretty quiet. Got nothing else to do. Nothing better to do, I mean. So there's nothing pressing. And what happens inevitably in these settings is that the mind quietens down. And when I say the mind quietens down, what do I mean? Thoughts quieten. And how do thoughts quieten exactly? The frequency and intensity and the content of the thoughts mellows out a bit. And suddenly there's this feeling or experience of something that we call peace or relaxation, to put it another way. It's a lovely experience mainly for most people. Some people don't like that experience. They find it quite alarming. But the point is that when thought starts to calm down, the ever-present spaciousness or peace of the background emerges, where it always was there, but in that silence it starts to become more apparent. We start to realize that noise, for example, occurs against a background of silence. So if we're sitting there relaxing and we were to pluck a guitar string, there'd be a twang sound, then the note of the string vibrating, and then it calms down. It goes back to silence. And it's a good analogy or allegory for the way that life unfolds. It unfolds against a background of still silence. If we were to in fact, all the senses, you could say, as you're sitting there relaxing in this easy chair, occur against a background of silence. So even the things that we see, the visual stimulus, you could say, occur against a background of nothing. That's hard to imagine. It's really hard to imagine. But what is it? The absence of light. That's what I'm trying to say. Get that out. When there's an absence of light, everything falls into darkness, or falls away into darkness. And so light is the movement, you could say, against the ever-present background of darkness, or nothing, you could even say. Darkness makes it sound like it's something. It's nothing. Smell comes and goes. Taste. Not that you're going to be tasting much, unless you're eating food or something. One of the interesting things I find is the mind. The mind is a funny one. It's often imagined that we think about things. And so when you're sitting there in this relaxing space, the image, let's just say, pops into your mind of a difficult day that you had at work a week ago. Maybe it was one of those awkward, tense things where you're friendly with a colleague and you had a disagreement, a professional disagreement, and it somehow became more than that. It sort of traversed into your personal friendship with that employee as well. So you became a bit funny with each other after the disagreement, a bit tense and a bit standoffish. And it's annoying because you like this person, yet you somehow haven't been able to resolve it. So it comes back to you as almost a haunted thought of the past, a memory. And it seems like we're thinking about it. That's the general description when people talk about their thoughts. I'm thinking about this event, this thing. What I find interesting is that the thought itself occurs within a space that allows any thought to happen. By virtue of the fact of this space that judges nothing, or you could say allows everything, that thought can appear. You can have the most horrendously awful, appalling, terrifying thoughts, and they occur equally and effortlessly in that space of nothing, you could say, that empty space. It's a perfectly accepting space. It denies nothing. It's the space in which thought occurs. So in some ways you could say maybe a better description, this is just conceptual, but a better description would be the space is containing a thought. The space is containing a thought. That's a bit of a sort of clunky way of describing it, but there's a sort of truth in that. The space is containing a thought. I wouldn't say the space is having a thought. That sort of anthropomorphizes the space as a person or a thing or an intelligence of some kind that's doing something. So the space contains a thought. But the funny thing is, when you ask people about thoughts, they have an idea that the thought itself is the container. The thought is having an experience. So I'm thinking, it becomes a kind of idea that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about a difficult experience that I had last week at work. It's like that experience is appearing in thought. What's not seen often is that it's not appearing in thought. It is the thought itself. It is the thought. Or appearing, another way of saying it is appearing in mind. This is appearing in mind. Mind appears in this space. Is somewhat more accurate. Now remember, when I say accurate, we're still talking conceptually. We're always talking conceptually. And the reason I keep throwing that caveat out there is because I know that the mind locks onto things as if they're true. This is true. Once I've learned this or heard it from someone, I now believe it, and now I try and run with it, so to speak, manipulate it and make extrapolations and predictions based on that fact. Mind loves that. So this new way of looking at it, if you like, if it is new indeed to you, is it helps to somehow distance oneself from the content of thought. Not that I'm saying that you need to distance yourself, but there can actually be a nice experience as a result of distancing oneself from the content of thought. And it helps to realize in some ways, the relationship of thought and mind to space and awareness. So the space itself is, you could say it's awake. It is awakeness itself. And you only know that the thought is there by virtue of the awakeness. Some people prefer awareness. I don't like awareness for some reason. I just don't like the concept of it. But anyway, you could say it's an awareness. The space is aware. So anything that occurs in that space, I will be aware of. Now that's a really clumsy way of describing it. You have to create an I who's aware of. But just forgiving that clunky model, the thought occurs in the space. And this takes the mind away somehow from the idea that the content of thought is important, that it's somehow necessary to focus on the content of thought. We tend to look at thought, especially when we're stressed out after a difficult event like the one I was describing, and we focus on the event. It's like getting hooked into a movie intimately, like you're really on the edge of your seat about the story. And you know that very well that thought occurs in a narrative, very frequently at least, not all thoughts, but there's a narrative element to thought, such that it could be a personal narrative, and in a stressful event it's my personal narrative. So we focus in on the thought that's occurring in the awake awareness. We focus in on it as if the narrative is the point, or the reality. Everything that is occurring occurs in this space. It's one way of saying it, it's like everything is a movement in space. It's all a movement in space. The error, once again, is the thought, the belief, that the movement is in the thought itself. You're looking into the thought, at the action in the thought. It's not quite like that. So the space, to me, is fascinating. Not to everyone, this is just a personal preference. The space is closer to that subjective I, the subjective sense of one's existence, is more closely aligned with that space, because the subjective sense of existing, of being here, being alive, however you want to call it, is uninterrupted through the entire day. Nothing interrupts your existence, you could say. So that's interesting, because it means that all the thoughts I have about myself during the day, or about my life, I know that they're changing, they're ever changing. And the emotions that go with them are always changing. So the emotions also are a movement in that space. But my existence itself is eternal. It doesn't get rocked by the contents. No matter how unpleasant my emotions or my thoughts, that space in and of itself is this seamless, smooth, eternal background, substrate, you could say. So if I'm focusing on the thoughts and claiming that they're me, or rather the other way to say it is that the mind itself meta-reflects on thoughts, creating the I as it meta-reflects. So what it's saying is a thought is triggered by another thought, and in there's a thought I, continuously occurring. And as the thought I continuously is triggered, and it is a triggering, and it is an experience, an event, there are contractions in the body and emotions that make it a very convincing illusion that it's a personal event to a separate person. Let's see if I can think of an example. Imagine this is another one for people at work. Imagine you're at work and there's perhaps been a difficulty in a team or in some project, and you have a feeling that you made a boo-boo. Something you did was a bit dumb, and you're waiting. You haven't really admitted it yet, and you're waiting for everyone to kind of realize it was you, perhaps. So there's this awful gnawing tension. You're thinking, how am I going to fix this? Shall I just admit it? Shall I just say, oh, I just made a big mistake, guys? I underquoted for a job, or I upset an important client because I lost my temper, or whatever. And you're sitting there, and there's a thought maybe that jumps in, this like a sort of memory of the event that was the problem. There's like a triggering memory, and straight away, very quickly, almost just as fast as a flash, there's another little thought. I did that. Suddenly, in that space. And then there's another, which triggers another thought, perhaps, like the future. What's going to happen? You're getting yelled at by the boss. You're in the boss's office. There's a quick little flash of the boss going, "You're out of here, Jenkins. That was your last straw," kind of thing. And then you're unemployed in your imagining. And then in between those, there's little I did that. It's me. Thoughts happening, and also I forgot to mention little pulses in the body that suggest it's personal to this body here. This idea of body. It's happening inside the body to me. So every little thought event, every little movement of thought in space is accompanied by a physical movement in the body in this space as well. And it's a very convincing story or process, you could say. So you just totally believe it's all me, me, me. And you're thinking to yourself that as these thoughts are appearing, you're looking into the thought itself and seeing that as the reality. That's the reality. The thought is the reality. And it's in those moments of extreme stress, perhaps. I use stress because it's a great way of experiencing this awfulness. The space seems to vanish. It can't be seen at all. There's no, as far as you know, there's no space underlying anything. All there is the awfulness that seems to be happening to me personally. But the awfulness, this is where it becomes amazing. The entire awfulness is happening in that space. The space denies nothing. It allows awfulness. It allows for the experience of total awfulness to happen. So the space is funny like that, and you could say that there's no judgment in the space, but again, those concepts are very tricky because it starts to make the space seem like God. God doesn't judge, the space doesn't judge, ergo the space is God. Now you could use that analogy, but it trips you up eventually when you start anthropomorphizing, because there could still be this funny idea lurking down in the unconscious that God might not like me. the space doesn't like me, maybe, So yeah, I'd be cautious of those analogies. So it's just a space. And we know that from the calm times, when we are calm, we're relaxed, that spaciousness emerges very quickly as well. It doesn't take long. And the space, you don't have to earn the space, which is lovely too. You don't have to figure it out. How do I figure out space? It's ever present. It's always there, forever, eternally. It doesn't go away. You don't have to cultivate space through some practice. It's just there. So this dialogue was really to shift the conceptualizing, I guess you could say, that we look into the thought or the mind as the mind contains experience. The thought contains the action, you could say. It's actually the space. The space contains the thought. The thought is just a movement in space and time that occurs in a background, you could say, or a container if you prefer, of space or spaciousness. So we look into the space and see the thoughts moving. Not the other way around. We don't look into the thoughts and see the world moving. That's where it seems to be moving. But in the thought, the world is still. Isn't that funny? In the thought, the world is completely still. And it's just the movement of thought, you could say, or the apparent movement of thought in space that creates motion and movement and time and space and everything. Well, this is it. Almost at the office. Gotta get my game face on. Get into the mode, get into the zone. Feeling a bit mystical this morning. Feeling a bit otherworldly. Feeling a bit spacious. Not a good mix to go into an office and have to think about officey stuff. But a coffee will help, no doubt. Anyway, this has been Winterview with another brief dialogue. Thanks for listening. Comments are welcome.